The engine's damaged. The overspeed perpendicular flight just now had damaged the power system of the aircraft, so it has to land. Sean answered plainly. He remembered that he had once skimmed through the structural plan of a military-use aircraft power system out of interest. Are you really a rank B student? Reeve stared at him in disbelief. Being a jack of all trades but master of none can never become an outstanding researcher. Sean was once told by his tutor that he has endless curiosity, but does not have the patience for extensive research. This was a fatal flaw for a researcher. Meanwhile, the aircraft has landed smoothly on the ground within a deep forest. Once again, an anxious atmosphere spread across the cabin. Mark came out from the cockpit with a deep frown on his face and said, "Hey researchers. Get ready to leave the aircraft, we're walking over to Base 14. What did you say? Leave the aircraft?" Captain White has yet to recover from his paled face. He did not even have the energy to stand up. The apprentices gaped at Mark, waiting for him to tell them that it was all a joke. Mark shrugged, "All of you can stay here, after all, it'll be a 12 hours walk from here to Base 14. 12 hours, the atmosphere within the cabin was like popcorn in oven. 12 hours. Not 12 minutes. And the sun will be setting in less than an hour. And there will definitely be zombies lurking in the forest." Then, Heine stepped out from the cockpit nimbly. His icy cold eyes were as though a knife edge that tipped up everyone's heart. "Let's go." With that said, he lifted a box with raw uranium, opened the cabin door and headed into the forest without turning back. Mark sniggered while hauling up a box in one hand and said, "All of you stay here then. I bet the Tides organization would love to offer you some tea." "Well, what do you mean?" The apprentice's face turned ashen. Reese glanced at Sean and handed a box towards him, and said solemnly, "Come with us." Without a second thought, Sean was about to follow Reeve out of the cabin but was held back by the senior who peed in his pants out of fear. "Don't go. They may not be able to protect you. It's best to wait for the rescue from Base 14. Sean took a deep breath. "Do all of you really not understand what's happening now? The platform that was originally our supply station has now been taken over by the Tides organization and their scheme is to stop this aircraft from bringing the raw uranium back to Charles. With the Tides ability, they'd probably be able to track the location of this aircraft faster than Base 14 and for sure, they'll come for us. Do you think the Tides organization will honestly serve us a cup of nice black tea?" They were dubious. Only Captain White came before Reeve and said, "I'll go with you as well." Once Captain White and Sean left the aircraft, those staying behind shut the cabin door heavily. Captain White let out a sigh. Don't worry, their choice is not necessarily a mistake. Captain White and Sean had seen the capabilities of Mark and Heine. If the Tides organization planned to destroy this aircraft at any cost, both of them believed that their chances to survive would be much higher by following Heine and his team, than by staying in the aircraft. The sun was setting, and a warm, red glow filtered through the leaves of the trees, leaving a wide shadow on the ground. The sky turned gradually into a dark shade of orange. Sean raised his head and listened to the chirping sound from birds homing to their nests. As darkness falls, the world sunk into an eerie silence. Only a faint sound of Sean's military boots walking on gravel and fallen leaves can be heard. Walking in front of him was Mark, and the one behind him were Captain White and Reeve. He walked carefully, following Mark's footsteps for he could barely see the path before him. Suddenly, Mark stopped walking. "What is it?" "Shh." Mark placed down the box in his hands and drew out his knives from behind. Within the murky shadows, several pairs of glowing green eyes stared at them gleamingly. Sean held his breath. He may not have seen them with his own eyes, but he had read about them in books. They are a kind beast called wolf. They do not have massive body but fast and agile. They have powerful bites with a ferocious and cunning nature. Reeve turned her back towards Mark, similarly, with daggers in both of her hands. Sean did not know which was worst, zombies or wolves. And because of his unknowing towards wolves, a faint trace of fear started to rise in his heart. The sound of Captain White's gulp was exceptionally loud in this tense situation. The wolf pack gradually closed in and Sean stared at them intently. This was his first time to see the beasts living in the wild. They did not howl, rather, they let out a threatening growl. Heine slowly walked over to where Sean and the others were and stood before them. There wasn't a hint of fear on his face, while a surge of deterrent force emitting from his body. He went down on one knee with one hand supporting on the ground and gazed at the wolf pack. The silhouette of his back exuded an air of inbred arrogance, like a misplaced luminescence trailing across a sharp edge of a blade and descent into darkness. Shortly, the wolves backed off bit by bit and disappeared into the shadows. How on earth did Heine Burton did it? As Sean sighed out in relief, a noise of an aircraft engine sounded from the sky. Captain White looked up and exclaimed, "Thank God." Reeve came forward and muffled his mouth before dragging him to a tree and hid in the shadows. Sean did the same by concealing himself in the bushes, but when he had a glimpse of the person beside him, he froze. He thought he was trailing after Mark, he never thought that it was Heine Burton. Sean knew that a hideout like this was practically useless. Opponents who are equipped with night vision goggles could spot their locations effortlessly. If it's the search team sent by Base 14, we'll be saved. If not, Sean did not dare to think what would happen to them if it was the attack from the tides. His heart was pounding as a chill ran down his spine. His hands were shivering in fear, despite not showing a single emotion on his face. Without warning, Sean was dragged aside by someone as a spark flew past his ear and plunged into the bush beside him, crushing the gravels into fine grains. Sean could see the pair of eyes gleaming within the darkness. And as his heart was about to throb out from his chest, Heine pushed him aside with his palm. Half of his face landed on the ground, and before he could grasp what was happening, Heine removed the gun components from his waistband and started assembling them swiftly. Sean was then kicked out of the way, causing him a moment of nausea. Right at the moment he was kicked off, numerous laser bullets grazed his shoulder, waist and even his thigh. Sean was in shock when he landed on the ground. For a moment, he thought that he was shot into a beehive. His breath formed a white mist from the cold night air, his arms and legs were rigid from fright. As he anxiously looked towards the night sky, he was struck with lightheadedness for a second from the dazzling stars. Sean, run. Hurry. Reeve dragged Sean along as she sprinted towards his direction, his wrist nearly dislocated from the force. Mark already had their guns assembled. The guns held in their hands had a different build with the rifle gun that was once popular amongst people 200 years ago. They are shorter in length but longer in shooting distance, and their power are much frightful. The weapons equipped by the Special Task Forces when dealing with zombies are dual blades or daggers, whereas for the Tides organization, they are armed with the more modernized weapons. Bang! Mark fired a shot. A flare of light traveled between the tree leaves and grazed the left wing of the aircraft. Despite not being a direct hit, its accompanying heat has ruptured the side of the turbine engine. Following Mark's doing was a series of aggressive attacks from the enemy. Mark was running around frantically. Why aren't they using missile? Probably because they had a change of plans. Originally, it was to stop us from bringing back the raw uranium, but now, they want it for themselves. For hundreds of years, energy shortage has always been a major problem that humans strive to resolve. Reeve looked into the sky and clenched the guns in her hands. She then signaled Sean not to move before darting towards the enemy. The laser bullets flew past her heels and exploded behind her. Sean swore that he had never seen a person in his life that could move as fast as Reeve. But if this continues, Reeve would definitely get hit by the bullets. Yet, all Sean could do was to stand there while lifting the boxes filled with raw uranium. Mark fired at the aircraft while running through the forest, in hope to draw the enemy's attention away from Reeve. The aircraft circled in the sky as another laser bullet grazed Mark's shoulder and exploded. Mark tumbled into the ground. When Sean thought that he had collapsed, Mark stood up, holding a gun in his hands and dashed towards the direction where Reeve was. His gun was damaged in the shooting and could no longer be used. Don't move. A cold and icy voice commanded from behind, freezing up the air. Sean turned back subconsciously and saw Heine sprinting towards him in a speed that could split the wind in half. Sean's pupils dilated to the rims of his irises. The moment Heine leapt off from the ground, his vision froze as though everything around him disappeared. Heine then stepped onto Sean's shoulder with the tip of his foot and leapt higher towards the sky. At that second, Sean's world crumbled into pieces. He raised his head to see Heine pointing his guns towards the aircraft in mid-air. Blast! The night sky was once again lit up in brightness. The aircraft's left engine let out a loud blast and fell instantly like a collapsing building. And before the aircraft could regain its balance, Heine had fired the second shot, destroying its right engine. Sean gaped at the sight. Until the moment the aircraft crashed to the ground, only then he noticed the intense pain on his shoulder. Gritting his teeth, Sean's arm was shaking uncontrollably. He was in no condition to continue carrying the box. He kneeled on the ground while clutching his wounded shoulder. His brain could not think of anything else except for the bone-crushing pain. Heine broke my shoulder. This was a totally different level of pain in comparison with the pain from being thrown on the floor and face being grazed by Heine's blade. Sean, who was born and brought up in Charles, had hardly got himself injured, and this time, he nearly stifled from the pain. The fallen aircraft hummed for a while, and eventually stopped. Heine and Reeve stood in front of the cabin door, armed and ready to shoot whoever that came out from the door. The cabin door slid open, and they were taken by surprise by the countless zombies that was swarming out from the cabin. Damn it, Mark drew out his daggers and started killing. A few zombies ran towards Sean's direction while letting out a low growl. "Stand up and run. Hurry," Reeve shouted at Sean. With death before his eyes, not knowing where his strength came from, Sean hauled the heavy box with his left hand and bashed it into the zombie's face before him. Sean had no weapon nor the ability to fight, so all he could do was stare at the zombie opening its mouth that was about to split apart, revealing its yellowish teeth. As Sean was about to shut his eyes and accept his fate, a sharp blade pierced through the zombie's wide-open mouth and stopped at the position that was less than 1 centimeter away from Sean's nose tip. His heart nearly stopped. The sound of blade drawing out penetrated Sean's nerves. The zombie sprawled to the ground, dead. The darkness was slashed apart, and what lies at the end of Sean's sight was Heine with a nonchalant look on his face. This man has unhesitatingly pierced into the depths of Sean's thoughts and thoroughly conquering it. Sean could not help but to be in awe of him. Behind Heine was a field of the zombies' remains. In less than a minute, the zombies that swarmed out from the aircraft has been completely cleared up. "Sean, are you okay?" Reeve rushed over to Sean, knowing that his injuries were no trivial by looking at his bloodless face. "Where's Captain White?" Sean had not seen Captain White since the sudden assault. Reeve pursed her lips and looked to his side. When Sean turned to follow her sight line, he saw Captain White lying under a tree, face covered in blood. Clutching his shoulder, Sean stumbled towards the tree and realized that a bullet penetrated Captain White's brain. He placed a hand on Captain White's neck. His body was still warm, but his pulse had stopped. Head lowered, Sean felt a lump in his throat. This was his first time to experience the death of his comrade right before his eyes. Sean, who has been living in a sheltered life in Charles, has now breathed the unique smell of blood. It has a stench similar to metal rust, and despite being still warm in his hand, he felt a bone-chilling cold within the depths of his mind. "Sean, we have to rush over to Base 14 now." Sean nodded quietly. "And we still have to deliver the raw uranium back as soon as possible. So we'd have to leave his body here." Sean took the box in Captain White's hand, and staggered a little when standing up. "Reeve, let's go." He was dead. Anything done after that would be redundant, but the raw uranium in their hands are especially valuable to Charles. Sean gave Captain White's remain a military salute. As he turned around, he saw Heine tighten his fingers, hand raised to his brow, and the moment he lowered his hand was as though he severed all pasts, but exceptionally earnest at the same time. Mark and Reeve did the same. No matter how much special task forces disdain technical soldiers, nevertheless, they respect every lost lives of their compatriots from the bottom of their heart. "Let's go." Reeve took the box from Sean's hand as Sean trailed behind them strenuously. Reeve turned back to check on Sean from time to time, for fear he will collapse all of a sudden. A person walked over to Sean's side and lifted him on the shoulder. The movement was crisp and undefiable. "Ah!" Sean nearly fainted from pain with the sudden movement. "Boss," Reeve called out in surprise. Mark, who was standing a few steps away, also had a look where he had choked on his own saliva. Only then Sean realized that the one carrying him was Heine Burton. He lifted a box in each of his hands and proceeded in a steady pace. Sean, however, was suffering from living hell. His was sick to his stomach, and his dangling arms was jerking his fractured shoulder on every steps taken. The feeling of bone piercing into his muscles made his teeth chatter. Every minute, every second, was torture. Reeve stared at Sean in sympathy, but she could do nothing. At last, Sean passed out from the insufferable pain. By the time Sean regained consciousness, he felt a sensation of weightlessness. And the moment his crushed shoulder touches a surface, his eyes snapped open immediately. He then found himself in a place similar to a tunnel with a blinding light before him, stimulating his brain. The doctors and medics encircled him and lifted him onto a surgical table. He caught a glimpse of Heine leaving the room, as condescending as usual with a hint of disdainfulness. Sean's right collarbone and shoulder blade were close to comminuted fracture. However, when Sean heard that the apprentices who chose to stay behind in the aircraft were all killed by the Tides organization, he rejoiced quietly. At least, he is alive. For times, how lives go are dependent on the choices made. This time, his choice was risky, but wise. The most talented part of Sean's brain is the ability to filter out all negative incidents that he faced. Despite being a night that most people would usually be restless, he was sound asleep within half a minute. The medical technology nowadays are highly advanced, where dismembered limbs could be joined back through nerves reconnection. Hence, the comminuted fracture of Sean's was only considered as a minor problem. 3 days later, Sean's shoulder has fully recovered. While he was bedridden these few days, he had heard some rumors revolving around the Base 14 commander Lieutenant Colonel Raven and Heine Burton. Heine went off to rescue 12B ranked apprentices personally. However, not only did he fail to save them, He even failed to protect the only officer in the team, Captain White. The incident has caused discussions among the people in Base 14, believing that the death of those students was due to the misconduct of special task forces who did not take their lives seriously. In truth, Heine has successfully break through the assault from the Tides organization and deliver the raw uranium back to the base without fail, whereas, they were given the mission to rescue Sean and the others on short notice. Even if complaints were filed with the Military Discipline Office, who else would investigate on Heine Burton? Lieutenant Colonel Raven's adjutant captain will coincidentally happen to be the cousin of Captain White. The death of his cousin hit Will hard, where he decided to send a rhetorical report back to Charles. However, Sean, who had survived from the catastrophe, haven't got the slightest interest in all these conflicts. And being the only survivor of his research team, he was now assigned to another team by the commander of Base 14. His only wish now was to spend the remaining days in the base in peace and then back to Charles. As Sean was leaning on bed, listening to music, he received an order from Lieutenant Colonel Raven to have him come forward to the command center and conduct an after-action report. Sean held his head in his hands in distress. Here comes the trouble. He neatened his uniform and straightened himself up before following the secretary into Lieutenant Colonel Raven's office. Lieutenant Colonel Raven looked like a man in his late 30s. He did not have any noble achievements, but his ability to defend and uphold this age-old base for many years has proven him to be a staid and respectable person. A dainty and exquisite cup was placed before him, steaming. When Sean gave him a salute, he returned him with a small nod and took a sip of his tea. Beside him stood his adjutant, Captain Will. What made you choose to leave the aircraft and proceeded on foot to my base with the Special Task Forces? Without greetings of any sort, Lieutenant Colonel Raven went straight into questioning. His eyes were telling Sean that he wants to get some specific information from him. Because I agreed to the Special Task Force's judgment then. Judgment? In a perilous situation back then? Did you not know that once you left the base, an aircraft with a strong bulkhead would be much safer than the outside world? Sean shook off his lassitude. All this time, he had known that Special Task Forces and Central Academy of Science did not get along well. Special Force soldiers were resentful of technical soldiers' quick success in the military when they do not have the need to go through any military training, or some even have not seen a zombie in their whole life. On the other hand, most technical soldiers were contemptuous of Special Force soldiers and perceiving them as no more than zombie scavengers, and that their future in military are nothing like technical soldiers. But all of these have got nothing to do with Sean. Every dutiful soldiers, no matter their ranks or their units, Sean respects them from the bottom of his heart. And now, he did not want to be involved into the political dispute between Special Task Forces and the Academy. Lieutenant Colonel, during then, our supply platform has already been seized by the Tides organization. They shot a guided missile at our aircraft, and after we got rid of it, the aircraft was forced to land due to the overheat of the engine. It is believed that the raw uranium materials were their aim. If the rescue unit of Base 14 failed to arrive before the Tides organization, not only will we lose the raw uranium, all of us may have been annihilated as well. Thus, Colonel Heine Burton had made the decision to walk over to Base 14, bringing along the uranium. And through my own analysis, I have concluded that his decision was a wiser choice than to remain in the aircraft. Lieutenant Colonel Raven folded his arms on his chest, looking at Sean coldly. Sean was unperturbed, without a slightest waver on his face. In the end, the adjutant beside Lieutenant Colonel Raven lost his patience and grabbed Sean forward by his collar. You're lying. You're the only one who survived in your team. It's Heine Burton. It's all because he did not take the technical soldiers' lives seriously. His eyes were bloodshot. He grinded his teeth in anger as though he was going to eat Sean alive. I'm sorry, Captain, what I said was the truth. Truth? What is truth? Heine Burton said White was with all of you when he was delivering the raw uranium to the base. Are you going to tell me Heine Burton couldn't even protect merely 2 technical soldiers? This is dereliction of duty. He simply didn't thought of bringing White back alive. Sean stared at the face features of the adjutant and found that he bared a slight resemblance to Captain White. It seemed that the rumor saying Captain Will and Captain White are cousins was true. Will? He's still a student, not a soldier, Lieutenant Colonel Raven frowned. Captain Will finally let go of Sean's collar. That's why he's not worthy to be a soldier, Captain Will glared at Sean. Sean breathed out a quiet sigh. Yet, this subtle action has caught Lieutenant Colonel Raven's attention. Why are you sighing?